So now it's time to actually check the height. In the Honda service manual, they give a float height that's a really weird value. And the reason it's a weird value is because it refers to an earlier style carburetor which uses a different shaped float. Fortunately, Honda never updated the manual along the way, and so the height they spec is almost impossible to get. I find with these carburetors, the float height needs to be about 23 millimeters. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my caliper here, turn it on, and I'm going to measure the height of the carburetor. So we're going to rearrange the camera so you can kind of see how we're approaching this. So the first thing we're going to do is actually check the float height. And where I'm measuring from, I'm going to point it out to you, is from the surface here. This is where the gasket for the float bowl sits, to the very top of the float right here. So we're measuring this height here. Now I'm going to measure both the left and right side of the float because sometimes they're not even. They could be kind of canted or twisted a little bit. So we have to measure both sides, and we're trying to get an even number per side. So let's see where we start off with on either one, and then we'll have to figure out which way we want to go with our adjustment. So I'm using just a digital caliper here. They have all sorts of float tools and stuff, but this works just fine as well. I've been using this one for years. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out big, like that. I'm going to bring my caliper down until I just see it kind of touch the top of the float here. About there. All right, what do we got? 25, 93, 26 millimeters. So to me, that's a little bit on the high side. And what that means is if the float level is measuring high, that means the level of the gasoline in the bowl is a little bit on the low side. Because a lower float height, if I push down this, you'll see how it kind of moves down. Well, that's going to raise the average level of gasoline in the carburetor. I like to go a little bit more gas in the carburetor than not enough gas. So to me, that's high at almost 26 millimeters. I'm going to bring it down about 3 millimeters. I'm going to go check the other side real quick too. We'll see where we are. Now I know there's some other thoughts and opinions about if you should do it with the carburetor like work like this, or you should take it and turn it an angle and see where it's going. I tend to find that I like to set them like that and go with a value from here, because that spring, there's a spring holding that guy up. As long as that spring doesn't compress, we're okay. So I'm going to come in here, measure that side. Same deal. So we're like 25 3/4. So again, we need to move it about 3 millimeters. And that tells me the floats, though, are pretty close in comparison. So how do we make the adjustment? That's the question you're probably asking. Well, I'm going to push out my pin that holds my float in place. And I want to point to you to this tab here. This tab is what touches the, let me turn that so you can see a little bit, the back side of the float needle here. So by bending the tab up or down, I can change the overall height of the float. In this case, I want the measurement to be a little bit lower. So I'm going to take this tab here and I'm going to bend it in. So actually in this tab, I'm going to use like this punch here, and I'm just going to kind of press on it real gently here, see if we can get to bend just a little bit. Doesn't take much usually. Let's try that. Just a little bit. We're going to do a little trial and error there. So I'm going to bring my carburetor back. Same deal, I'll put my float back in place with the pin. And yes, this pin should go in this easily. You should be able to push it in with your fingertips. If it's not, that means you got a kind of a burr on it. Alright, let's see if we can take another measurement here on our carburetor and see if we can make a change. Alright, caliper zeroed. Same drill. Just saw it touch there. Alright, we're like 24 1/4, so we're getting closer. We're definitely need to move it just a little bit more, but I don't need to check the other side for now. I'm going to go ahead and take it back out. We're going to bend the tab just a little bit more, and then we'll take another measurement. And if either side is within a spec, we'll call it good there. All right, we're a little bit over 23. That's good for me. I saw it dip a little bit. Let me take another measurement on this side. We'll take a measurement on the other side. And if we can see it consistent in there, looks like it's about to touch there. 23. So I'm kind of happy with that. Let me go check this side. Sorry, do it again. Caliper moved on me. Right about there. What do we got? 23 and some change, 23.31. That's good enough what we need. So we're within 23 millimeters. I'm pretty happy with that. So we'll call it quits there. And you can see that the float itself still has some upward movement on it. That's actually up on the spring. So yeah, that's setting the float height, which is, again, sometimes a tedious task, and especially if this thing's been monkeyed with a whole bunch, or they call it the hanger. That part there has been bent or distorted. Again, if something doesn't measure up right, I'd recommend just go ahead and replacing the float, because sometimes it's hard to try to bend an old one back into place the right way. So, all right, well, moving on. All right, so our last pieces of putting the bottom of the carburetor together are putting in our jets and getting our float bowl prepared. So right here I have our two jets. We have our main and secondary jets. The smaller one being the secondary jet. Sometimes it's called the primary jet. The larger one I call the main jet because it is the biggest jet. Other people call it the needle jet. In this particular carburetor kit, our jet sizes are going to be a 70 for the secondary and a 105 for the primary. You know, jet sizes kind of change throughout the years of your carburetor, so you know, if you're not quite sure which jet to put in, what you might end up doing is cleaning out your old jets if they're still usable and putting them back in. As long as they're not corroded out, you can reuse the jets. So you'll notice in some of these jets here that we have O-ring in one part and a groove in the other. Well, there's a system to it. I have here which is called the jet retaining clip. Now this is a must-have part. If you don't have one, or it's missing on your carburetor, we do have like new replacements for it. It only goes in one particular way. If you look at it in detail, you can see that you have a larger opening here and a smaller opening on this side. We have a pretty even symmetrical slit here, and then on this side we have a larger opening in the slit. So that means the orientation of this guy goes in like this. Okay? So what I'm going to do, it's kind of an interesting operation here. Take my main jet, he goes in there, hold it in place. Take my secondary jet, that, kind of hold it in place. Before I drop them in, always a drop of Marvel Mist oil there on all the parts. Alright, let's see if we can get this all to fit at one time. Just like that. So what this piece does is that the float bowl touches this and pushes down and puts pressure on the jets to make sure they stay seated. It's kind of a weird design, but that's the way it is on these 350 carburetors. So it's a must-have piece, and they all kind of pop in together like that and come out together like that. I want to point out a couple things. One, if you have to do a jetting change down the road for any kind of intake, air cleaner, or exhaust changes, this is the main jet, so that's the one you're going to swap out. So it involves, popping off the bowl and changing this one jet out right here. Sometimes you change it to secondary, it just depends on the conditions. Something else I want to point out is this little plug right here. In this particular version of the carburetor, it's a plastic plug. Sometimes it's an aluminum plug. If you are missing a plug here, well, that's bad news. That plug needs to be there. If the plug is there and it's fallen out, I suggest epoxying it back in place so it doesn't move. If the plug is missing, you're going to have to fab a piece to put in there, because that's a very important plug in the carburetor. Hopefully it's still there, but if it's not, just check, make sure it's there and not wiggling and falling out. All right. So our last kind of steps on the bottom of the carburetor is to put on the float bowl here. Flip him over, get him ready, prepared, ready to go. But before I get him ready to go, I'm going to take my float bowl screws, and I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize compound on the threads. If you know us around here at Common Motor, we like our anti-seize compound. All this is going to do is keep the threads of the screw from getting stuck next time you want to take this carburetor apart. So all it needs is a little blob of it. The screws are also the same head and pitch as the screws that are on the top of the carburetor for the diaphragm cover. However, the flipple ones are a little bit longer screws. So if you're questioning which is the screw to put in, it's the longer screws, the flipple. All right, those are prepped. Our last step is to put our new gasket in the float bowl. This is the question a lot of people ask me. They say, well, the gasket that came out of the bowl has this kind of, a house shape to it. And yeah, you're right, it does. And the new replacement gasket is literally just an O-ring. But it fits in there, I guarantee it. And there's a trick to getting it to fit. So here's the trick. You can use Vaseline. In this situation, I'm going to use a little bit of white grease here. Yeah, you can keep it like that. And I'm just going to take a little bit of white grease and a little bit of white grease here in the groove. That's all I'm doing. And the white grease is just there to kind of help stick that O-ring in place. Now, once you put gas in the carburetor and this thing's been sitting here for a while, yeah, it's going to take that house shape to it. But until then, we're going to make it fit. So, just a little bit of white grease. Doesn't have to be a ton. I want to make sure I keep the grease in the groove, and not so much inside the float bowl itself. It's actually very critical, kind of at these corners. So get a little more here. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that's not covered in the manual. You can use Vaseline; it'll do the same thing. Again, all it's trying to do is stick that gasket in place. Let's try it like that. Kind of wipe out any of the excess that is the inside of the bowl here. Cool. Excellent. All right. So, I'm going to take my O-ring. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stretch. Just kind of rotate it and give it a little bit of a pull. Let's see if we can get the drop right into the groove here. Yeah, a lot of folks write and say, I have a hard time getting this to fit. Well, again, stretching it out and putting a little bit of grease in the groove will help. You can see how it's a little bit tight still. Let me see if I can give it more of a stretch. Stretch a little bit more. Let's try that. Boom, look at that. Brilliant. It just fits in there ever so perfect. So yeah, there's the trick to putting the float bowl O-ring in. Alright, so back to the carburetor itself. I'm going to point out this is the overflow tube here. That overflow tube needs to go in a very specific spot. Remember I pointed out this hole, a little bit wider here on the tang. Well, that's where the overflow screw or overflow tube goes. When I drop this on, I'm going to tilt that for you guys so you can see a little bit better. I want it to go on like that. And it's going to want to pull up a little bit this carburetor because that retainer is keeping that bowl up a little bit. So it's when you put the screws in that it falls in place. So you get two screws started kind of catty corner, get the bowl down. I'll put the other two in. It should torque down nice and smooth and nice and even. Just like that. So it felt pretty good. Now it's totally possible that O-ring can slide out of the groove there, and you can pinch it during installation. And then if you pinch the O-ring, you're gonna get a leak. It happens. I've done it before. So just be careful. The grease is going to help try to keep it in the groove because if it's out, it's going to help slide back in this place. And the anti-seize is going to make the screws a lot easier to put in the carburetor and also easier to come out next time you're in here. Just kind of go catty corner. Snug. All right. Well, that is the flip bowl. One last piece we haven't put in yet. You can probably see right here. We have this is where the drain plug went. Depending on your model of carb, you're going to have a different style drain plug. This carburetor happens to use what I call a large style drain plug, meaning that head is pretty big there in diameter. A few things to point out on the drain plug that a lot of folks don't know is it is hollow in the middle. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a little tiny hole in the middle. Because the idea was that you crack the screw, the gasoline dribbles through this center hole here, and on the sides of it you have these little tiny holes. There's like one right here that goes through the other side. And there's another set right here. So there's actually 4 holes here on the drain screw. More often than not, this thing is going to be packed full of dirt and grit, and you have to use a wire and like a little drill bit to kind of poke it out and get all the dirt out of it. But yeah, that's also a source of hidden dirt that most people don't realize is there. I have this other O-ring here. Just that kind of fat one. It goes on here. Some of the carburetors with the early style, I call it the early style drain plug, don't use an O-ring. They use a flat little aluminum washer to seal it. So it just depends on what version of the carburetor you have. All right, O-ring is on. As usual, a little bit of oil on the threads and on the, come on. A little bit of oil on the threads and on the O-ring itself. Just like that. Put that in like that. Screwdriver, and just stop when we feel it seat. That's it. All right, that is the bottom side of the carburetor. We're going to flip this thing over and get the top side ready and throw the diaphragm in the slide.